Hello and welcome back. As always, I'm Kelly, and it has been a while since I made a proper video. 2022 wasn't exactly a great year for my productivity. I had been streaming consistently, though I have been missing a couple of weeks here and there near the end of the year. But this channel is about making videos proper, so let's start off the year, New Year's resolution with the worst that came from last year, and hopefully things will get better. As always, before we start the list proper, few ground rules. But before we start, as always, the little disclaimer, I did not see everything. A lot came out, and I was lucky to see one movie a week, let alone the 3 that dropped, or 6 that dropped during the Christmas weekend. Oh my god. So if you don't see a certain movie on this list, there's a good chance I probably didn't see it. Or it's lucky and I didn't think it was that bad of a movie, so I didn't even consider it for this list. And of course, as always, this will be a top 11 list because tradition at this point, might as well just stick to the theme. Now to start this list off with the dishonorable mentions. Lightyear. Proof that Pixar will make anything these days.
Lyle Crocodile.
Shawn Mendes as a cartoon crocodile. How is this ever going to succeed?
Jurassic World 3. Dominion.
Yeah, I include the number in the title. Are we tired of all of these stupid reboot quills where they bring back the old cast to do nothing with them?
The 355.
I am genuinely shocked that a boring movie like this from January of last year didn't make this list. Please help me.
Pinocchio. Disney's version. 2022.
I had to say it like that because there were no less than 3 different Pinocchios that came out this year. One of which I didn't see because it's from Russia, one of which is on Netflix, which is actually really, really good, from Guillermo del Toro, and one from Disney where they just rehashed the same story again. Great. And with that out of the way, let's start the list proper with, of course,
Number 11. Thor Love and Thunder.
Yeah, there's probably many Marvel people out there who are going to disagree with this, but this is honestly just me gloating because I called this crap back at Ragnarok. Comedy that completely destroys the pacing and tone of your movie, characters acting completely off and just without dignity or intelligence in Thor's case, and an overall butchering of the mythos that we know and love from the comic books. Thor Love and Thunder takes everything that was bad in Ragnarok and turns the dial up to 11 and shoves it all in your face and expects you to like it for that. It really says something when the most consistent character in this film are the 2 screaming goats. And they got the most laughs out of me. Probably the most damning thing I can say about this is that it was better than Ragnarok.
Number 10. Morbius.
Honestly, what else can you say about this movie other than, it's Morbin time! In all seriousness, this movie had no chance whatsoever. The effects range from, okay, I see where you're going to, dear God, what am I looking at? The acting goes from Matt Smith having so much fun chewing the scenery and being genuinely entertaining to Jared Leto trying and failing to do a sympathetic mad scientist realizing the error of his ways story. And this movie feels like it was written in 2000, sat on and stepped all over, torn up to shreds, stapled back together, and thrown out in theaters in 2022. Twice because of the memes, which is just amazing. Honestly, everything about this movie would have been bad enough, but the fact that the memes were able to trick Sony and the filmmakers to release this movie again so it could bomb twice in theaters gives it a legendarily bad status and a place on everybody's worst list this year.
Number 9. Halloween Ends.
Hooray! Evil dies tonight, and love lives forever. I will give more credit to this movie than most will. It is a big swing and a miss that was trying to at least do something slightly different than the Halloween story that we're used to. This movie is not just about Mike Myers terrorizing a town. In fact, it's more about how the town reacted to having that kind of reputation and the fact that the killer got away and having that fear and anxiety seep into every little aspect of this town. And I do like, in theory, how that idea could spawn a Michael Myers protege, but the execution of this movie is just not good. Mike Myers is barely inside of this movie when he really should be more of a presence, even if he is off-screen presence. His serial killer protege, I'll give credit to the actor. He is acting the hell out of this, but he's just given very little to work with from a script writing basis. And the fact that this movie was mismarketed as the final showdown between Mike Myers and Laurie Strode, which does happen in the last 10 minutes of this movie, but is not the focus, was a very, very stupid choice. I will give the movie credit in two ways. One, I prefer movies that fail, but still take a big swing. This was a step in a new direction that did not pay off, but I respect it. Two, this movie was more tolerable than Halloween Kills. But that's pretty much all the credit I'm going to give it.
Number 8. The King's Daughter.
This is another one of those movies that came out really early in the year. I think it was like the first week of February that nobody went and saw. And for good reason. It looked like garbage. This film is a very, very weird hodgepodge of ideas. There's a captive princess story, a learning about your long-lost dad situation, and some kind of weird fantasy tale about living forever by having mermaids cry. It's really dumb. I will give it credit that if you're looking for a bad movie, this would actually probably be a pretty good pick because the costuming is outrageous. The acting from Pierce Brosnan is legendarily bad. And if you thought the effects in some of the other films that we put on this list are bad, wait till you see this mermaid. There's a lot of enjoyment to be had inside of this film, but it's ironic enjoyment because the movie itself is just garbage.
Number 7. Don't Worry, Darling.
If this movie was not on my worst list, it would be pretty high on the most disappointing list because the trailer actually kind of looked good for this movie. A horror film with a 60s vibe where things aren't what they seem, reality warping around you, weird things going off in the distance. This is all stuff that looks and sounds on paper to be very interesting. What we get in the film is a bunch of weird crap that doesn't explain anything, and ultimately weird computer virtual VR world. I both love and hate Black Mirror because this feels like a Black Mirror episode that was stretched into a 2-hour film. This film is trying for a high concept. It's trying to be high horror, mean something, say something about society. But what it's saying is kind of asinine, contradicted by the story itself, and frankly speaking, has been done before and done better, especially in TV format. In fact, this episode looks suspiciously like an episode of Stargate I watched back in the early 2000s. But I'm sure you didn't rip that off. Because I can also say this happened in Star Trek. I can also say it happened in Black Mirror. I can also say it happened in pretty much every single sci-fi series for the last 2 decades. And when a film tries to present an old idea as something they themselves came up with, it's the definition of pretentious. And to be fair, the actors in this movie, every single one of them, are giving 110% of this. The main lead, I hope you go on to do something better because you carried this movie by yourself. Even Harry Styles was pretty good in the film, up until he spit on Chris Pine, but we don't talk about that. And they are being wasted on such a by-the-numbers, cookie-cutter, cliched horror film presented as something more. Don't worry, darling. I'll take this to the trash.
Number 6. Catwoman Hunted.
Yeah, I know this is a bit of a rule break of mine. It's not a theater movie. It technically didn't come out on streaming or VOD, but it's just that bad that I had to make an exception here. For those who aren't aware, DC Comics and Warner Brothers have been releasing direct-to-DVD animated films for years now. They even have their own universe. In fact, they have multiple universes in there because they recently ended one universe and started another one. This film is one of those that doesn't tie into anything. It's just a nice little gimmick that, frankly, means they might explore new options because this is actually an anime movie, believe it or not. Would you be able to tell from this picture? No, you can't. And that's probably why they changed it from this one. But this movie is an anime film, and it's really bad. The animation is stilted and stunted. I'm guessing probably animated by the same people who made Neo Tokyo on Netflix. And if you don't know what that is, don't look it up. It's bad. Just really bad. The story on this one is also extremely ludicrous. A lot of just out there coincidences, things that have to happen that don't make any sense. And it is a complete waste of time. So if you have HBO Max, just don't even bother looking it up. The one positive thing I will say about this film, though, is that it did have some surprisingly good deep cuts inside of it. There's a joke in the movie where Catwoman has to infiltrate a costume party that's superhero themed. And so she shows up in one of her classic 60s era costumes, which, kudos, very appreciated. Also, you have deep cut characters like Cheshire showing up. Again, I really wish you brought Red Arrow, even in his stupid trucker hat. Might have made the film a little bit better, but I appreciate the fact that you're there.
Number 5. Firestarter.
This movie wins the award for the most boring thing I saw in theaters. Period. And it didn't have to be that way, because the first, 15 minutes of this movie is actually kind of an interesting idea. These psychics hiding on the run, using their powers as little as possible other than to make money and, stay off the radar so that these corporations and governments don't know where they are and can find them. Meanwhile, you've got a little girl who can't control her powers at all, constantly setting things on fire by accident. There's a great story in there, and then as soon as they go on the actual run, this is the most boring story I think I've ever seen in my life. I am not the guy that minds if your movie is 3 hours long, but this movie I think was an hour and 40 minutes, and it felt like 3 hours in that theater. Nothing was happening, and everything that was happening was so slowly paced that I thought I was going to lose my mind. Which is genuinely a shame, because again, Zac Efron and the little girl at the very beginning of this movie are great, and I would have loved to see the potential of that first 15 minutes carry through the rest of the film. But it didn't.
Number 4. Breaking.
Chalk this one up to another one that nobody saw in theaters, except for me, because I was completely alone on opening day seeing this at my theater. Most people probably don't even know what this movie is. There was no promotion for it. I remember seeing one trailer a week before on YouTube, not in front of any movies, on YouTube. John Boyega in a true events movie about a guy who took over a bank with a bomb. How did this not get any promotion? Answer, because the movie is mostly pointless. Things happen, there's some tension moments, I guess you could call them, but none of it amounts to anything. But I think that's because this movie is less of an actual film and more of just a product to tell you how badly the VA treats, veterans. Really nothing else in the film matters. They keep harping on this, and there's a couple of scenes where Boyega goes from, bathroom to the phone a couple of times, talking to various people, clearly off his meds. Nothing else really happens in the movie. That's it. I wish there was more here. But really, this film is trying to do basically John Q. That movie where Denzel Washington takes over a hospital all because the insurance company is screwing him over. But it's trying to do that, but with real true events. And I'm sorry, but unless you're actually willing to fictionalize the true events to actually have a point or meaning to it, sticking true to them probably is what doomed this movie. It is tragic what happened to this guy, and it's even more tragic what happens to actual veterans and things. But I have to judge this as a film, and as a film, it was bad. Boyega, you did a great job at it. Maybe get a better agent to give you something better.
Number 3. Jeepers Creepers Reborn.
This film takes the cake for the worst reboot movie I think I have ever seen. And that is saying a lot. This film was a limited release that touted itself as a sequel to Jeepers Creepers, but also kind of a reboot, a new beginning for the franchise. But not really, because they basically just did the same thing that Halloween Resurrection did. It's all a TV show now, but it actually totally happened. And there's a real monster hunting us inside of this place. And oh my god, are we really doing this again? On top of that, the effects, the acting, the lighting, direction, everything, on a purely technical level, this film is below TV quality movie. I've seen many TV productions that are way better than this. And honestly, this is probably the final nail in the coffin for Jeepers Creepers. I don't see this franchise recovering from this in any way, shape, or form. Nobody is going to want to spend money on this to try to give it a proper reboot or anything like that. And maybe that's for the better at this point.
Number 2. Blacklight.
And of course, we come to the Liam Neeson film that probably nobody saw because it came out in January. Or at least I think it was January. Let me double check that. Oh my god, it was actually in February. How did I forget that? Probably because it is basically a January film, and Liam Neeson pretty much dumps at least 2 of these at the beginning of every year now. Whether or not it was the one that he was a sniper on the border, or the one where he was on a train, or the one where he was on a plane, or even the one where he was basically a go-to wet man. Liam Neeson pretty much stars and drops one of these movies every single year, usually multiple times, and all basically following the Taken formula. And this is no exception, but it's significantly worse than those, mostly because the movie was clearly filmed during COVID, and most of the actors are barely on screen with each other. In fact, there's so much bad blocking and cutting inside this, I doubt anybody was on screen with each other at all in the movie. So many conversations that happen over the phone so that you can do them in different locations. So many times where they're clearly in the same scene together, but it's very clear that they're not actually there with each other so that they didn't risk anything. And of course, you can imagine that this makes the action unintelligible garbage inside of it. And all of that pretty much culminates into what I can probably sincerely say is one of the worst films of Liam Neeson's career. And I hope it doesn't stay in it forever, but it might.
Number 1. Moonfall.
And at last, we get to the culmination of pretty much everything else on this list. Moonfall. This film is basically a reboot, being that the script is more or less Independence Day resurgence. The acting is complete garbage. The writing is obnoxious. The effects range from okay to what the hell am I looking at very quickly, sometimes within the same shot. And the story is just completely laughably up its own ass the entire time. But you may notice that I'm smiling through most of this because Moonfall is genuinely a very good time if you're looking for bad movies. Even more so than The King's Daughter. This is the bad movie checkbox down to a T. With all of the problems of this movie, I could genuinely actually recommend this movie, even as the worst thing that came out, on a strictly technical level, on a strictly acting level, on a strictly artistic level. This is an F. A solid F. It is the worst thing that came out. But there is still enjoyment to be had because it's that bad of a movie. So I do actually recommend checking out my number 1 pick here. And that's pretty much it for my list. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like, share, subscribe. All those things help, channel grow bigger. And if there was a bad movie that I missed, or if you disagree with my list, let me know in the comments down below. Let's get some healthy discussion going. And that's it for me, so I guess I'll see you guys next time.